data set to prove the point and then solicited a scientist to publish it under his name so that it could become a fact in the literature. Okay. Very savvy manipulation of scientific credibility in this story, which I can't tell in detail here, but intrigued me a lot. Also was very clear that as the person who is always the bearer of bad news to a breeder who might contact her by email or call her on the telephone, she can't be the emotional support group. And to make a fact in an effective way, that is to say something people will act on, required also the emotional support system that would allow a breeder not to feel stigmatized by the genetic disease of his or her dog. So that the emotional economy of the stabilization of a fact was also quite deliberately engaged as part of the work of doing genetics in this breed. So the research design, the mating design, the alliance with a veterinary ophthalmologist, and then with biochemical geneticists, the alliance with people who will form support groups, the alliance with the breed group movers and shakers to get a certain degree of openness, the management of the material culture of making a fact whole, namely Australian Shepherds are subject to collie eye anomaly and action has to be taken. The kind of everyday story of what constitutes a fact, its literary material and social technologies, is in C.A. Sharp's practice in a I think, extremely interesting way. The contrastive person I would introduce here is a woman named Linda Weiser, a woman about 60 years old, who has bred Great Pyrenees, livestock guardian dogs, for about 30 years, and been involved in the introduction of these Basque livestock guardian dogs in the American ranch in connection with wolf reintroduction programs also, so that the livestock guardian dogs might minimize the amount of shooting and poisoning that goes on in the reintroduction of the wolves, who will utilize the fringes of the national park territories where they are reintroduced and will raid the ranches. The use of the livestock guardian dogs as wolf predator repelling organisms is a very interesting issue. She also manages the working dog people in the breed, the pet dog people in the breed, the rescue operations from mistreatment, the health and genetics databases, very strong ethical police force among these movers and shakers in the breed around what constitutes proper training, running a library of information to educate people up about how to have one of these 120-pound dogs in a proper and appropriate way. Makes a really interesting contrast with the terrorism stories of the so-called dog holocaust, Rhine, Westphalia, stories out of Hamburg, and the yellow press use of the terminology of Holocaust without any historical consciousness, which I suspect you've seen even more than I. Well, let me have the next slide, and I'll conclude this story. Okay. By the telemetrically equipped wolf that is being introduced to the wild pack by her mentor. The mentor is saying, we found her wandering at the edge of the forest. She was raised by scientists. Okay. This is my figure of ethnographic practice, of the companion animal species, of the relationship of the human raised by wolves, the wolf raised by humans, that kind of replay of the wolf boy story, the wolf child story. Don't worry, she was raised by scientists. She'll be a little strange for a while. Not to worry. This is another illustration of contemporary companion animal culture, too, at these edges between, I think biodiversity requires that kind of technology for its definition and management. Just as I think diversity is the name of the game in capital accumulation, diversity is the name of the game. Biodiversity, the market, and technology are joined at the hip. This is not news. Biodiversity is, as a word, very recent. And involved in this kind of sociality very deeply. Next slide. This is actually an anthropologist, Faye Ginsberg, whose father did research on wolves. That's one of his wolves. But I won't have time to talk about that slide, so let's go right on to the next slide. The girl's best friend is, of course, your father's wolves. Now, I think engaging in the study of technoscience involves a number of important reversals. Those of you who know about border collies, who, near as I can tell, cheat They win all the dog sport performance contests. They're being used to run birds off of runways in major international airports. They are overachievers. Border Collies can work independently up to a couple of miles away from a handler to round up recalcitrant sheep. They can both work to very close command with a handler or on their own at great distances. Border Collies, on the whole, are too good to believe. They are also, one Border Collie fancier puts it, they have obsessive compulsive disorder and make very poor pets. A Border Collie that makes a good pet is not a Border Collie. Ordinary people should not have Border Collies. It's a bad mistake. They require a kind of job that most people can't provide their Border Collies. Now, for a sheep to get the Border Collies for the sheep to pen the Border Collies at the sheep trials is the kind of reversal, or the kind of what I think of as epistemological whiplash that studying technoscience always produces. You think you know what you're going to find, but in fact what happens is a constant kind of ontological and epistemological whiplash, such as that particular reversal. And then the last slide is another joke on the all the time everywhere mistake. The all the time everywhere mistake that those of us who do scholarly work regularly make when we don't really intend to make it. We're now not looking, we're at I think we are at a moment of historical mutation, whoever we are and whatever this moment is. There is something happening globally that is changing the name of the game of life and death for billions of people. There are mutations in lifeways going on that we try to name inadequately by globalization and other really anemic terms. Technoscience is another term that tries to name these mutations in chances of life and death for all the organisms on the planet. Okay? Well, in the Renaissance, another figure of technoscience culture, Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, the man of perfect proportions, is a favorite iconographic figure of man, genius, machine, art, science, genius convergence. Well, I like much better Harris's cartoon of the dog of perfect proportions because of the joke it makes on the mistake of both relativism and universalism. The joke it makes on the mistakes that are so built into our philosophical discourse that we don't know how to do inquiry without remaking those mistakes. But perhaps our best hope is that we will remake the mistakes in interesting ways. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now you see what makes her so unique among the thinkers. She pays attention to the details. And that's only because she was raised as a scientist and cannot believe in her own assumption without giving a lot of proof.
Why did my cells die?
I could go with your thesis and only with 1% of that, just one of the examples would be totally enough proof for me. I can that is the first thing. The second thing is, it's interesting, with all this material, really the real challenge is not actually to challenge you in terms of your material, because you have been in the doghouse so long, there is no way that we can really compete here with you, but to ask what is the thesis, what does it mean, what can we do with this kind of material, not in general, the typical question, what can we do with it? And this, I think, happened also to your cyborg. I understand that you said, I made it as a particular historical thing, as a history thing, and you cannot understand it properly if you don't understand
the detail.
The detail, yes. But what it took on a life of its own.
Sure did.
And I personally...
God forbid.
No, sorry.
Certainly did.
Look at me, I became one of your fans because I didn't care much about your historical stuff, but this metaphor started to convince me,
Something's going on.
And I understood that this is a very important way kind of to discuss the relation of man and machine in a different way, not as a